Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? I'd like to just welcome everybody. First off, my name is Karen Ray. I'm going to try to help facilitate the Zooming. I'm very honored to get to be part of this forum tonight. And on behalf of Westminster Save the Farm, which is hosting this event, welcome. Our group is a community-based group that has spent the last 3 years in a struggle with the city opposing a high-density development on the historic 100-year-old farm here in Westminster. And while we did not win that argument with the city council did vote to approve in favor of the developer. We continue to look at ways to protect our community and to educate the public as a whole around what some of these developments are doing. One of the big questions that is before tens of thousands of homeowners throughout the Front Range is the question of metropolitan tax districts. In our situation here, we're aware that the developer will approach the city with an application for a metropolitan special district and wanted to offer this as an opportunity to educate the public on what these are, to whose benefit and to whose detriment. We're very pleased to be able to present tonight Jim Gibson, who has spent the last several years working on legislation and educational outreach around the character of these developer tax districts and the effects that they have on the communities that they reign over. The Denver Post in 2019 and 2020 did an excellent series of articles, which I highly recommend for those who want to get more detail about what these districts are. We're going to start our forum with Jim's presentation, and then we're going to follow it with a testimonial from some folks who live in one of the metropolitan districts that the developer of the Westminster farm is responsible for. The community is in Arvada. It's called GEOS, and they have some firsthand experiences which they would like to share. So with that, I just want to remind people, in order to not get feedback, so that everybody can hear, just make sure you're on mute. We do have the chat open. It's available so everybody can see your questions or comments. So please utilize the chat. Once our two speakers have finished their presentation, we're going to open the floor up for discussion. It can be through the chat or audio. If you want to be unmuted, just type in the chat, "I want to speak live," and we'll unmute you and let you have your question, comment to everyone in the forum, or put a written comment in, and we'll read those out loud, and our speakers can address those. I just ask that oral comments, try to keep your remarks to about 3 minutes so that we can get through everybody who's attending. It's looking like we have a pretty good audience here. And with that, I'm going to start by just introducing Jim Gibson, who has a PowerPoint presentation that he'll be giving us. Jim is an expert on metropolitan special districts and has provided testimony on their abuses before the Colorado Senate and local government committees and Colorado House Transportation and Local Government Committee. He's been quoted numerous times on this subject in the Denver Post and in the Denver Gazette. And just in terms of his background, he has a master's in business administration and public policy from Carnegie Mellon University. So with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to Jim, and I'm going to put myself on mute.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen. I'm hoping everyone can hear me. Karen, if you could just acknowledge that you can hear me with a thumbs up, that would be good. Can you? Okay,
hear you
great.
good.
Good, that's good to know. First, I want to acknowledge the Save the Farm folks. They have been great to work with. The city of Westminster is lucky to have these activists involved. And excuse my doorbell is ringing. I guess the folks who have been involved that I've been working with are Karen, Elaine, Lucy, Eric, John, Carl, and Rose. I may have missed somebody, and if I have, please accept my apologies, but it's been a great group to work with. And again, I think it's just great that citizens of Westminster have this activist group that's advocating on their behalf. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see my PowerPoint. And let's see if I can get that to come up here. Okay, here we go. And hopefully you're all seeing my screen now. Let me just give you, Karen's already given you some background on me. I got started on this issue when there was a metro special district created just to the east of my home. And the more and this is going back to 2019, I've been studying the issue ever since. And to be honest, the more I study it, the more concerned I get, the more troubling it becomes of how these metro special districts have been abused. Just a little background. I think where the problems start is developers will use these metro special districts where there's just dirt. Okay, there's no infrastructure, it's an unimproved lot. Of course, there's no homes, of course, no residents. And then the developer sets the boundaries of the metro special district, and then they propose it to the local government. In this case, it'll, of course, be Westminster City Council. And then assuming that if a local council or a local county commission approves the creation of a special district, then they hold an election, and that special district basically operates as a local government with many of the same powers that other local governments have. And so why don't we just get into what the contents of the presentation are. I think there's a intended purpose that the legislature had in mind when they gave local governments this option. And there's, unfortunately, through developer manipulation as well as loopholes in the law, it's turned into an unintended purpose where there's been a real deterioration in the democratic rights of metro district residents. Why MSDs? You might be hearing, I might be using interchangeably metro district, metro special district, MSD, so on and so forth. They're all the same. Why do we have these MSDs? From the developer's point of view, why not? It has become an increased source of profits to the developer without adding really any value to the communities they're supposed to be serving. Obviously, somebody has to pay the price for all of that, and it's metro special district residents who are. And also the folks in the surrounding neighborhoods outside of the district can also pay a price, unfortunately. All right, so let's get started on that. These are my words. This is what I think the legislature had. What the intention was is that these are new governments that can be created with the approval of the local governments. And if those folks who live within those boundaries would like to have maybe better public infrastructure or improved infrastructure, they can vote to charge themselves higher property taxes to pay back the bonds that finance those kinds of public improvements, things like roads, sewers, can be amenities like swimming pools, all that kind of stuff. So I think that was the idea of it, is to give that option to local governments who would want to create these kinds of opportunities. Unfortunately, it's turned into an unintended purpose through, again, some loopholes in the law and through some developer manipulation where it's become a source of profits for developers, again, without adding any value to the community. And it can encumber homeowners for decades in increasing amounts of debt. And when you have that kind of debt, you obviously have to pay it back, and they also pay it back in terms of higher property taxes and other fees. So that this second unintended purpose is really what the presentation is all about, and as an attempt to curb some of these abuses it might be advisable for Westminster activists to take this, if in fact the developer does go before city council, to take these issues in mind and make sure that if it does get approved, I don't think it should be approved in my own view, because I think there's too many opportunities for abuse. But if it does get abused, make sure that there's some conditions for being, for creating the special district so that folks do not abuse it, so the developer does not abuse it. When I saw a picture of this person at first, I had no clue who he was, and my guess is that other people don't know who he is either. He should be recognizable to a lot more people, okay? He is, his name is Chad Ellington. He is actually serving already on 8 Metro Special District boards. It's possible that he'll be, if one is approved in Westminster, he might be serving on that board as well. And he lives in none of those communities. This is where we come up with the notion that this is really taxation without representation. Chad is president of Peak Development and a principal partner in ORE Capital, the managing developer of Uplands in Westminster. He's also the owner, developer of the acquired net zero GEOS community in Arvada. And later tonight, we're going to be hearing what's happened in that Metro Special District, okay? So this is, and unfortunately, Chad is not unusual. There's a lot of developer executives who sit on numerous Metro Special District boards. As Karen said in her introduction, there was a series done in the Denver Post, I think it started in 2019 and went through 2020, that talked about these developer-controlled Metro Special District boards. And this is a quote from that series. You'll see that they're drowning residents into debt for decades. This is an actual quote from the series. So much debt outstanding, they, meaning the residents, won't ever see it go down. There's been many cases of developer-controlled MSDs that have put layer and layer and layer of debt on Metro Special District residents, and in some cases it's kind of dire. They may not actually able to ever pay back the debt. Of course, when you issue all that debt and without the consent of the Metro Special District residents, you've got to increase taxes to pay back that debt. And we've seen some cases where property taxes have gone up astronomically in a very short period of time, again, without consent of the residents of the Metro Special District. And again, as I kind of alluded to earlier, in part, those higher property taxes make those homes within the district more expensive. And that being more expensive housing, that puts upward price pressure on homes in the surrounding communities, homeowners who had nothing to do with the development or nothing to do with the creation of the special district. It can increase their property taxes and unfortunately promote gentrification and unfortunately result possibly in an involuntary displacement. They simply can't keep their payments up with the property taxes and they have to move, okay? Okay, so why MSDs? Again, from the developer's point of view, why not? I'm just gonna take you through a thumbnail sketch of what the process is probably gonna be like in Westminster, the way it kind of works. Local governments review proposed MSDs that are presented by the developer. And then for purposes of our discussion, the city council may in fact approve the Metro Special District, and that authorizes the conducting of an election, okay? And the purpose of that election is to ask the people who are property owners at that time whether they would like to have a Metro Special District, okay? That works fine in established neighborhoods. It doesn't work so fine when the only people who are living in the district at that time are affiliated with the developer. So a lot of votes are taken before any resident sets foot on the property, and a lot of those are almost irreversible. So the only voters in that initial organizing election are affiliated with the developer because there's no one living there yet. And the things that they will do, one is they'll approve the creation of the Metro District. You'll see this in election after election. It's 5-0, yes, we want to create a Metro District. But they also approve a bunch of ballot initiatives at that same election. For example, almost always the Tabor rights of future Metro District residents will be rescinded. So if I was to buy a home in that district, I will not have the ability, like every other Coloradan, to vote on tax increases or additional bond debt. They also will sometimes put on the ballot, they'll waive term limits because otherwise those would be in place. And I think they're doing that because they want to centralize all the control of the fiscal decision-making into the Metro District Board, which will be populated by developer-affiliated employees. And this is increasingly, this is becoming a bigger and bigger issue every year that passes by. We have about a fifth of the state's population that right now lives in a Metro Special District, according to the Colorado Department of Local Affairs. Okay. Here's another concern that I've come across. This is an actual Metro Special District. All of this is one large residential development. You'll see there's actually 4 Metro districts on this one residential development. Here's District 1, 2, 3, and 4. District 1 is this very, very small parcel of land, okay? And then real residents eventually over time will buy homes and move into Districts 2, 3, and 4, okay? As soon as a resident moves in, they're eligible to serve on their Metro Special District Board, okay? So they can get on that board. But unfortunately, that may be meaningless depending on how all this is set up. Because what happens is that you'll see this small parcel of land, sometimes it's just a few square feet by a few square feet, and the only property owners in that district are affiliated with the developer. And so as a result, the only people who can serve on that board are affiliated with the developer. And before any resident sets foot on that property, of course, before any resident sets foot on this property, the developer is occupying all the seats on all these boards. Before any resident sets foot on that property, there's an intergovernmental agreement. In other words, a contract between District 1 and 2, between 1 and 3, and between 1 and 4. And basically what that contract says is District 1 is the boss of District 2, and the boss of District 3, and the boss of District 4. So even if I was a resident, I want to get active, I'm concerned about what's happening in my Metro Special District. If District 1 says, hey, you know, District 2, we think that you need to do a bunch of public improvements and you need to issue some debt, and as a result, your property taxes will go up, I have to follow the commands of District 1, unfortunately, and increase taxes on my fellow residents in District 2. I don't have a choice because of that intergovernmental agreement that, again, was set up well before any residents were able to get on any of these boards. Okay, so that's another potential abuse that should be watched for in the developer's proposal that they'll be making to Westminster City Council soon. This is another source of some concern. Okay, this is actually is very, very typical. In the initial stages of the project, where there's no residents yet, of course, no property taxes are yet being paid, what happens is the developer firm itself will make a loan to the Metro District that they control, okay? And you can see this is basically a loan agreement, and it's signed by the same person on both sides of the transaction. I show this to lawyers and they go crazy. Basically, this person is representing, in one hat is representing the Metro District, and the other hat is representing the developer. And this is a source of potential abuse that can happen, in that sometimes the interest rate on this can be above what it should be. And that when that loan is made from the developer to the Metro District that they control, the people who are paying back that loan are going to be the future Metro District residents, okay? And if it has an excessive interest rate on it, they're paying too much. There's a lot of reasons. I think Westminster actually has a policy in place now that I'm going to read to you. I'm not going to read all of it, but I'm just going to read some of it. The city only has about 7 residential Metro districts right now. The last one was approved almost a decade ago. And in my mind, for good reason, Westminster policy is making it difficult to approve a Metro Special District. I'll start quoting some of the words from that policy. Residential MSDs. In general, the city is opposed to the creation of MSDs to fund capital construction of residential developments for the following reasons. 1, virtually all existing Westminster residential development was funded without MSDs. So the lack of these districts has not adversely affected Westminster residential development. 2, creation of a residential MSD creates a differential property tax structure among similar residential developments where the MSD resident is paying significantly more property tax without any commensurate public benefit. And 3, the higher mill levy and MSD projects may make these residents less inclined to support property tax increases. I think they're talking for other purposes, including maybe a school bond issue or that sort of thing. So Westminster, at least on paper, is saying that there's a high bar to create a metro special district for a residential development. And I hope that they keep this high bar in mind. If the developer does make a proposal to create a metro district, I hope that the city council will keep that high bar in mind and ultimately not grant the creation of the metro district, the metro special district. Okay. So let's get into why MSDs. And again, the better question I believe is to ask it from the perspective of the developer. Why not? The district itself has become a significant source of developer profits. Many developers are abusing this tool to increase their bottom line, again, without increasing any value to the community. We just saw one potential case of it where the developer at the initial stages of the development makes a loan to the metro district that they control, and they charge at an excessive rate. Obviously, the people who are going to have to pay back that high interest rate loan back are going to be the future metro district residents who had no say in the negotiation of that loan. And the other thing that they do, especially compared with the rest of the country, what happens in the rest of the country when there's an unimproved lot, usually either the city will build infrastructure, the roads, the sewers, everything else like that. The developer will then come in and build and sell homes around that infrastructure. Or alternatively, the developer buys an unimproved lot. They either go to the bank for a loan, or they use their own money, and they use that, either the proceeds of the loan or their own money, to create the infrastructure. They recover that cost in the price of each home that they sell, okay? Which I think is a much more accountable and transparent way of selling homes that formerly had been on unimproved lots. And what they do in the process, that if this development goes south, they're fine. They're not liable for the infrastructure financing. And let me give you an example. Say I'm a developer, I have an unimproved lot. I'm planning to build 100 homes, okay? I build and I sell 10 of those. And then unfortunately, the real estate market goes through the floor. I've determined I'm not going to be able to sell the other 90 planned homes that I that I was planning on building and selling. And now that the debt that's been accumulated in that time period between the time, those households that are sitting there, those 10 households, they're basically liable for all that debt, not the developer. In the rest of the country, if the developer uses his own money or gets a bank loan, he's liable, okay? But now the liability has been shifted off of through this abuse of metro districts. It's been shifted off of the developer onto the district residents. They're the ones that are taking the risk now. The other thing that's done, and this is very convoluted, I may have questions about this. Sometimes I don't think I explain this adequately because it is so convoluted. What will happen is a developer-controlled metro special district board will issue bonds from the metro district, and again, with excessive interest rates on them, and then the developer turns around itself and buys them for themselves, okay? So let's say they're controlling a metro district. Okay, we're going to issue $50 million in bonds, and we're going to issue them at, I don't know, 15%, well above what the market rate of interest is these days. Then the developer, that's it sent out to the market, then the developer will step up and buy those loans themselves, buy those bonds themselves, I'm sorry, and just let them sit on their books forever, and they're getting a great interest rate on what is a relatively riskless investment. And then the other abuse that sometimes happens is that the developer is spending tax money on behalf of the Metro Special District residents. And there are folks who specialize, vendors who service these districts. They're like district managers that can be hired by the developer, accountants that specialize in this kind of work, lawyers and so forth. And because the developer is spending resident money, anytime you have someone who's spending someone else's money, they're not nearly as careful with it as they would be with their own money, they overpay some of their vendors. Again, in this case, they're fattening the bottom lines of the vendors at the expense of the Metro District resident without providing any sort of added value to the community, okay? Now here's the purpose of this next slide is to just try to make the point that we're talking about real money here. This is a hypothetical, okay? A $512,000 home in Adams County in Westminster. They pay a total of about a little bit over $3,700, just a regular property taxpayer on their home, okay? Now, on a proposal that was made by the current developer for Uplands, this is, I think it was in 2018, they were proposing that the residents would be authorized to charge the residents up to 55 more mills in addition to the regular property taxes that they would pay. So that, if that was to come to fruition, Metro District residents could be paying $5,800, again, on a similarly valued home, $512,000. That's quite a hike from what the regular Westminster Adams County property taxpayer is paying of $3,700. So we're talking about, and these are obviously paid on an annual basis. This is a major increase to the cost of the housing to the Metro Special District resident, okay? So it's real money we're talking about. So again, when all these arrangements are set up, they were all set up in the absence of actual residents who are living there, because the only people who voted on rescinding Tabor rights or rescinding term limits were those folks who were representing the developer, and they're obviously voting in the interest of the developer, not in the interest of future Metro District residents. When folks come to consider buying a home and they're sitting at closing, much of this is disclosed to them, even though it's still not adequate, that they might be paying higher taxes. But even if someone was frankly, a lot of people who are at closing are signing documents they're not reading, and they really are more interested in getting the keys rather than reading all the fine print. Even if they were diligent, however, let's say I bought a home in a Metro District, and I'm not a lawyer, but assume I'm a lawyer, and I read all the agreements and say, okay, I think I can handle this property tax. Months or maybe a year later, those taxes can easily be increased, and I'm locked in. Without my consent, I'm locked in after the home has been purchased, okay? So until I sell the home, until I get the home off my hands, I've got to pay those increased property taxes, again, all of which have been increased without my consent. So there's very little democratic accountability to the residents and to the community at large. I know that if I was let's say I was a Metro Special District resident, and I saw my first property tax bill and said, wow, this is a lot more than I thought I would be paying, probably my first inclination would be to call my local city council person, okay, and say, hey, what's going on here? Well, that city council person is gonna tell me, I can't really address your questions about the Metro Special District taxes. You're gonna have to take that up with the Metro Special District Board. So I can't get help from my city council person on that portion of my taxes. So I go to the first Metro Special District Board meeting that I attend, and I look at the board, and the people who are making the fiscal decisions are not my fellow residents representing the interests of residents. They're affiliated with the developer, and they're representing the interests of the developer. So I may have a board that I can go to, but maybe a board that's not interested in responding to my concerns, okay? And the other thing that I found, much to my surprise as I've studied this issue over the last 3 years, is that, every other Coloradan, if they're upset with their local government or they're upset with state local government, has the option to put an initiative on the ballot. They can collect signatures on a petition, If they get enough qualified signatures to qualify that to be on the ballot, it then sits on the ballot, and if the upcoming election is they can see whether a majority of people agree with the initiative or don't agree with the initiative. Few Metro special district residents don't have that option. They cannot bypass the Metro Special District Board. They just have to live with the decisions of the Metro Special District Board. Okay, so obviously these folks, they get caught in this situation. They're unaware. As a result, they're voiceless. They may have initially low property taxes, and then boom, there's a surprise down the road, and there's not much they can do about it. They don't know what a Metro Special District is, let alone that they might even be living in one, and they don't know that there's even a Metro Special District Board that exists that they can go to. Again, it may or may not be willing to hear their concerns. And frankly, in a lot of situations that I've observed, the developer does not go out of their way to tell folks that there's a Metro District Board or that there's even upcoming district board elections. There will be periodic district board elections. Sometimes the folks are not very aware of them because it hasn't been very well publicized. So those elections are frequently canceled. So the developers' people still get to serve back on the board. There's maybe 3 openings in this upcoming election, and there's no residents who have come forward to serve in any of those seats. And as a result, the developer gets to remain on the board and still make the decisions in favor of the developer, maybe possibly at the expense of the Metro Special District residents. The other thing that we've seen happen is that when folks do actually, Metro Special District residents become aware of what's happening and they want to be active and get on their Metro District Board, their Metro Special District Board, they will take the initiative to do that, and they want to ask some possibly uncomfortable questions of the developer. Well, we have some cases where the developer has gotten wind of that, and they seek out a more developer-friendly resident to run for that seat. And to make it worse, to make it even more unfair, if you will, they financially support that candidate that is more developer-friendly. In one case up in Green Valley Ranch, the CEO of the developer contributed about $40,000 to 2 candidates who were much more friendly to him than were the other residents who were running against those candidates who wanted to ask all those questions. So they can tilt the playing field in their direction in this way as well. It's not surprising. There's not virtually no outside oversight here. Very inadequate transparency. I've heard case after case after case where people are trying to get access to reliable financial information about what's going on with the district, and they can't seem to get the answers that they'd like. And, you know, basic questions like, well, how was the proceeds of that bond that was issued without my consent? What was that spent on? And was it spent in a cost-effective manner? Very, very difficult to get clear answers about that from a developer-controlled Metro Special District Board. And this is my term. I think these are private governments because they don't have any real democratic accountability strings on them. They can do a lot of the things that any other local government can do. They can put you in debt, they can tax you, they can put liens on private property and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, Metro Special District residents have no recourse about any of that. So that's how all the Metro Special District residents are paying the price for the abuses committed by developer-controlled Metro Special District boards, okay? And unfortunately, even the folks who are not involved in the development, this is a map, you can see that this is the uplands right here, where we're anticipating there'll be a proposed Metro Special District put before Westminster City Council. And the surrounding communities may in fact be adversely affected just from the Metro Special District, as well as the development itself, even though they have nothing to do with either of them, right? Because what can occur here, in part because there are higher property taxes on the homes within the Metro Special District, that puts upward price pressure on homes in the surrounding neighborhoods. That can result in higher property taxes for those folks, and some of these folks may not be able to afford those higher property taxes. and they have to involuntarily move out of the neighborhood. So even though they had nothing to do with the development, nothing to do with the Metro Special District, even the folks outside of the Metro Special District can pay a price. And so neighborhoods like Shaw Heights and Sunset Ridge and Observatory Heights could be experiencing some adverse impacts if the abuses that if Metro Special District is granted and the abuses occur within this Metro Special District, if they occur, they could also be victimized. So I'm going to end it there and turn it back to Karen. And I think I have to unmute Karen so that she can speak. And I will try to do that now. Let me see, where are you, Karen? I'm looking for you. Give me a second here. I'm not, Zoom is fairly new to me. Okay, I'm not finding you, Karen, on the list here. This is going to be an issue for us, I'm afraid. We have a lot of participants. I'm really grateful for all the folks. Karen, I can't find you on the list. No, I'm told it's below someone. Okay. It's Karen, there's Karen Ray. I just found her. Okay. I apologize for this delay. It might be easier for all of us to post questions in chat, and then I can read them. And there you go, Karen. You should be able to talk now.
Okay. Phew.
Sorry about that.
You're going to have to, why don't you start working on Darlan also. We are getting some questions in the chat. Make sure that everybody's reading those. There's some interesting comments and questions. Jim, get ready. Our next speaker, Jim, maybe you can unmute Darlan Chang and give him his video. Okay. Darlan is a resident at the GEOS Net Zero community in Arvada. This is a community that was started with the goals of being carbon neutral, and about 28 residential units were sold on that basis. About a year ago, that development was sold to Chad Ellington, actually, who's also part of the ORIAD Capital Peak Development Management Team at the Uplands Project, and re-visioned this community. Darlan's going to describe their fight, what they've been through in both preserving the integrity and goals of that community and what they have faced with their metropolitan tax district in Arvada. So with that, I'm going to mute again and give Darlan the floor. Please, everybody, keep up with the questions. Jim, they're loading up for you. So with that, let me just turn it over to Darlan.
Thank you, Karen. Could you also turn on my video? Or Jim, do you have the option to turn on my video? Yeah, when I click on the start video, it says that the host has to give me that ability. But Yeah, if that's going to take some time, I'll go ahead and start my comment. And when you figure out how to turn on the video, just go ahead and do it. So I'm going to start by talking about the GEOS neighborhood prepared remarks that we've prepared. I'm here to share our neighborhood's experiences. The district currently encompasses Block 10, which is where all of the GEOS neighbors live in. We have 28 existing homes, and there are 8 additional homes that will be built during 2022. 9 additional blocks are to be built out for an overall development total of about 280 homes. Infrastructure is nearly complete for blocks 1 through 4 of 91 homes. All homes of Block 10 consist of high-efficiency homes that are fully electrified and without natural gas. We don't have any gas pipelines in this first block, and these homes represent a total infrastructure investment of approximately $18 million. So the principles for high efficiency were to reduce the neighborhood's impact on climate change and the community's exposure to escalating fossil fuel-based energy prices. Unfortunately, these principles will not be applied to the new blocks of GEOS. Blocks 1 through 4 of the next 91 homes will be built out with standard homes, less efficient, and with the use of natural gas. Residents of Block 10 found their way to GEOS based on a vision. This vision is sustainability, elimination of gas for heating, cooling, and cooking, elimination of greenhouse gases that heat our planet, and healthy indoor living. Due to a 2020 court-ordered settlement of divorce proceedings, the original developer was forced to sell the yet-to-be-built sections of GEOS, consisting of about 250 new all-electric homes. This section was purchased by Peak Development, led by Chad Ellington, who promised the following in a press release on November 13, 2020. I quote, "As a first of its kind community here, we plan to build upon the project's sustainability-driven vision by introducing a thoughtful mix of uses, while at the same time bringing much-needed attainable housing to a desirable location in the Denver market," unquote. My neighborhood's communication attempts and multiple inquiries to understand the extent of the press release were thwarted for months. After months of being ignored by Peak Development, we learned that they decided to break the promises they made in the press release. Instead, their efforts were directed at spreading disinformation by falsely claiming that the original developer went bankrupt, that natural gas is essential in home buildings, that heat pumps do not work, and that there's no market for all electric homes. 12 state legislators wrote a joint letter asking Peak Development to reconsider, but Chad refused. The goal of both Chad and his selected builder was to persuade the Arvada Planning Development and City Council to approve this fundamental shift in a community designed to be carbon-free. Nearly overnight, the vision of zero-emission housing for 250-plus homes was unilaterally eliminated by the developer. The false claims used to justify this decision were parroted and supported by the City Council of Arvada. Natural gas primarily consists of methane, a greenhouse gas 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide over a 20-year period. This means that curbing methane can provide the relief the world needs for governments and businesses to negotiate the transition from fossil fuel to clean energy. This transition is vital in the effort to mitigate the runaway effects of climate change, the results of unbridled emissions of heat-trapping gases with the potential to literally set our planet on fire. Yet, during a conversation with Chad, we learned that he's unaware that methane is the main component of natural gas. How many more developers, builders, planning departments, and local governments are making decisions, issuing permits for more and more fossil fuel burning developments based on ignorance and disinformation from the fossil fuel industry? How many of these teams are working hard to approve more developments and more metro districts? What does it take away from our experience? Number one, the developer is a transient landowner who unilaterally made decisions on the future of our community, ignoring the building philosophy that was initially approved by the city of Arvada, and was a driver for current residents to buy homes at GEOS. The developers simply called GEOS Block 10 a failure. Studies show that the average home generates 7.5 tons of greenhouse gas emissions. Multiplied by 250 homes in a life expectancy of 40 years, Chad single-handedly is responsible for an additional 75,000 to 100,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions. Our question, who or what is a failure? Number two, Chad set a direction that contributes to a future of more air pollution, more flooding, more storms, more health issues, more death. In other words, an active and purposeful acceleration of human-induced climate change. Wildfires are the norm now. Denver already has serious air quality problems. In 2021, on some days, Denver had the second worst air quality in the world. Colorado residents deserve better. Number three, the developer dialed in increases in fossil fuel prices. This winter, owners of fossil fuel powered homes had a preview of what is to come. The cost of heating, cooling, and cooking with fossil fuels has and will escalate further. There is a host of evidence suggesting thank you for starting my video. There's a host of evidence suggesting that fossil fuels will become prohibitively expensive, forcing future residents to either invest in less optimal but costly retrofits to reduce their energy bills, or to continue to pay ever-increasing energy prices. Chad single-handedly determined this path for future homeowners in the face of preponderance of data that requires nothing but a quick and decisive transition away from fossil fuels. Here's where the rubber hits the road. The developer will be long gone. The homeowners are here to stay and will be paying the price. To give you some food for thought, the typical monthly home energy bill of a homeowner at GEOS is around $5. No cost escalation this winter, even with the events in Ukraine. Compare that to the energy bill a fossil fuel house pays. The projected future cost for a fossil fuel house is unregulated as fossil fuel. Number four, the developer's goal was to monetize the land as quickly as possible. Existing residents who purchase homes in GEOS have a vision. This vision could have easily been expanded to form the largest carbon-free community in Colorado, if not the US. Number five, the developer and builder claim that all electric homes are too expensive. It's common knowledge among competent developers and builders that there is current lifetime cost parity between traditional homes and all electric homes. It's common knowledge that all electric homes will also be less expensive soon. Increased upfront construction costs can be easily absorbed into a mortgage, resulting in lower increases in monthly payments when the savings from no gas bills and minimal electricity bills are factored in. Number six, the developer hired attorneys and accountants who charge hourly and have no fee cap. GEOS Block 10 residents were not consulted in the engagement of these legal accounting teams. We are engaged, however, in paying for the legal accounting teams and forced to accept the loan at a high interest rate, directly benefiting the developer. Financing the undesirable and unsustainable new direction of GEOS is high cost and effectively paid by the residents without our consent. Residents of the GEOS Metro District are effectively subject to taxation without representation by Chad. Number seven, Chad and his partners control the Metro District Board. Two residents, supported by a homeowners advisory committee, hold only an advisory function. Yearly elections of board members are rigged at a cost of $2,000, and an election to change the board composition carries a price tag of $25,000. The developer effectively assures that he retains board control. Number eight, the Arvada City Council and Planning Department did little, if anything, to investigate whether the developer's presentation and builder's assertions were correct. The building industry carries an outsized responsibility in driving climate change and the commensurate degradation of our planet. Globally, the industry is responsible for 40% of emissions. Still, the industry ignores, or shall we say, refuses innovation. The industry overall has no vision beyond maximizing short-term profits at the risk of setting large swaths of the planet on fire due to runaway climate change. The industry fights tooth and nail every time building codes advance, not surprising as the industry tends to control how codes are written. City councils charged with protection of the residents appear complicit in the developers' decisions. Based on our experience alone, it is clear that metro districts must undergo major reform. Our vision of sustainability was destroyed by Chad and supported by national builder for quick monetization. In other metro districts, homeowners experienced crippling financial penalties resulting in foreclosure of homes. The common thread is that financing schemes, absence of oversight, and risky business decisions threaten all metro district residents. Local governments must be engaged in the development process and must hold developers to account. Affordability goes beyond the original purchase price. Therefore, it's imperative that local governments require developers and builders to disclose their business practices, financing vehicles, and development goals. At worst, liability must be shared equally. The homeowner certainly cannot and must not be the sole entity that carries all the risk while developers reap the profits. Climate change, political instability, and the impact on home fuel prices are an additional component that will require further developments. The City Council of Arvada in 2021 had the opportunity to create the largest decarbonized community in the US, but elected to abstain from checking facts and listening to home buyers. Arvada, as well as many other municipalities in Colorado, need sustainability staff that can provide innovation and guide developments to a future sustainability powered by renewable energy. Metro districts must be reformed so that developers can no longer obstruct this necessary transition to sustainability. Now that I've shared the experiences of the GEOS neighborhood, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to share my personal experience. I moved my family to GEOS from the Houston area in 2019. My daughter was born in the Houston area, and I worked more than a decade and a half for ExxonMobil starting in 2003 with the vision of gas as a bridge fuel to a zero-emission future. I quit and discussed over that vision being destroyed by ExxonMobil doubling down on shale gas from hydraulic fracturing. My colleagues and I were well aware that gas wells and infrastructure leak methane. Leaking just 3% of the gas throughout the infrastructure makes using gas for energy as bad as coal and making the climate crisis worse. My personal experience is that it takes thousands of hydraulically fractured wells to equal the lifetime production of a single conventional well. So shale gas wells make methane leakage worse and require much higher prices than now to be profitable. Through my decade and a half in the oil and gas industry, I saw wild price swings from less than $40 a barrel for oil to $147, and $2 per million BTU for gas to $20. In the industry, it's well known that volatile price spikes of 10 times more are driven by the fact that the easiest and cheapest oil and gas have already been extracted. The so-called unconventional oil and gas require much more expensive extraction, such as hydraulic fracturing. Unlike other industries where products are expected to improve and get cheaper over time, the oil and gas industry needs their products of declining quality to get more expensive over time to keep ever more costly extraction profitable. I left the oil and gas industry behind for the GEOS vision of an all-electric, zero-emission future to show my daughter that I was doing all that I could to transition away from fossil fuels. It broke my heart to find out that the new developer of GEOS, Peak Development led by Chad Ellington, is betraying the vision because of its power over my metro district. My friend and his family lost their home to the Marshall Fire, and they stayed at my home over New Year's weekend to get back on their feet. They were impressed that there were no gas appliances in my all-electric home. My 13-year-old daughter was an infant when Hurricane Ike knocked out power to the Houston area for weeks, and she was not yet 10 years old when Hurricane Harvey dumped 48 inches of rain on the Houston area in less than a week. For the sake of her generation and our own, I'm doing what I can to accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels in order to prevent runaway climate change. Thank you. So I'll turn this over to Karen.
I think it's like.
Oh, okay, good. Okay.
Hello, I'm back, I think.
Okay.
We can go ahead and start taking questions. We have several in the chat. Those were both really interesting and informative presentations and a lot of food for thought. It is amazing to hear what some of the direct experiences of folks have been. And I just want to shout out to Darlan for that very moving presentation. I was really touched at the end. These stories need to be told. It affects not only the current homeowners that are living in these developments, but it's about what kind of a community we're building, who we want to be. So I'm just going to read off a couple questions. I don't see anybody who has said they want to be called on, but just put a comment in and we'll unmute you. You can tell that we're a little challenged on that front here. So just in the comment to everyone, say, I want to speak, and we'll call on you. But I'll just, Jim, do you want me to read the questions, or do you want to just?
Yes, Yes, let's just do it that way.
Okay, our first question or comment is from Jason. Is the Metro Board eventually, will the Metro Board eventually be transferred to homeowners? And I think he had a follow-up in there.
Can everyone?
Yeah, why don't you start with that?
Okay, I'm starting with this. Let me get this up. That's a very, very good question. Again, the question is, does the Metro District eventually transfer over to homeowners? That can be the case. It depends on how it was set up. I'm having trouble here. Just one second. Zoom blocks me. Okay. If people can see that, see if a resident can come on, they can come. I wish I could stand this just for 1 second. I apologize to everyone for this on-the-job training. I'm sorry, darling, that I couldn't get that video up sooner. Let me just, it says I'm screen sharing, and that's great, but I can't seem to. Okay, if people, hopefully they can see this. Let's say that a resident can come onto this. They can replace the developer in districts 2, 3, and 4, but they can't replace the developer in District 1 because the only property owners in District 1, if it's set up this way, will be affiliated with the developer. And before residents ever actually got there, the District 1 was made the boss of District 2, made the boss of District 3, and made the boss of District 4. So even if those residents are they're eligible to serve on their own metro district, they're not eligible to serve on the boss, what we call master district. So they still have to take all their orders from people who are affiliated with the developers. If the developer wants them, orders them to increase taxes, those subservient boards have to increase those taxes, issue the bonds, and increase their own property taxes. I hope that answered Jason's question.
Great. Confusing, but interesting.
Tell me about it. Basically, the developer gets to stay in charge, even if the residents take over their own board.
The next is, we got a couple of these. There was just a report on the news the other night. I think it was pretty widely seen that there's foreclosures taking place by the Green Valley Ranch MSD. 60 residents are facing foreclosure for non-payment on the developer taxes, and residents are pretty shocked at what is taking place. It's more just a comment, and I think that was on the evening news the other night. There's a question, what other fees can an MSD charge residents in addition to the mill levy? I think is what the question is referring to.
That can be left up to the imagination of the developer. Whatever, if the developer goes to the local, in this case, it could be Westminster City Council, and they include all the fees that they can add on to the property taxpayer's bill. If they're in that service plan and that service plan has been approved by the local city council, they can charge all of those fees. My experience is that local city councils and local county commissioners do not scrutinize these service plans when basically a proposal to create the metro district. So the developer he puts that service plan together, and he puts all kinds of fee authorizations in there. So it's basically left up to the developer's imagination on how much they can charge in additional mill levy, as well as additional fees to the metro district, special district residents.
So there's a few questions about the District 1, the few feet of developer land, and they become the master district over everybody else. So I'm just going to combine all those questions. Where can we find out if our MSD is set up with master board or not, and what the exact commitments are for our Metro Tax District? Do board members of the District 1 have to live on the land, on the premise? And the next question, so we can just take them as a group. Developer 1 can't be removed from a board question.
I didn't catch that last part, Karen, I'm sorry.
Is there a way to remove District 1 or Developer 1 from the board?
Gotcha, okay. There's a bunch of questions in there. And Karen, make sure I'm answering all of them, okay? Within this small, very parcel of land, there may not even be a structure there. They don't, and the only people who own property in what I call a master district are affiliated with the developer. Where you can find out about whether this is going to be the setup or not is in that service plan that will be proposed to Westminster City Council. And they will have to detail all of that, how many districts there are. They may or may not disclose. If there's a small district in there, you can probably count on it that it's going to be a master district, okay? Because they want to keep the amount of land to a minimal because they want to build on the development as much as possible. So they usually come up with a small parcel of land. They're the only property owners within the district. They don't have to live there, okay? But they still, because of that agreement that they made before any residents showed up, the District 2 board, the District 3 board, and the District 4 board, which may over time be taken over by residents, still has to follow the commands of District 1, again, which is totally controlled by the developer. Did I answer? There were a bunch of, I'm hoping I answered all the questions you had in that, Karen.
I think so.
If
Well,
not,
there's one question for my neighbor, Eric, and he's asking how can we find out if the GEOS neighborhood has this master district controlling us? Where could we find that out?
that's going to be in the service plan. Once we see the service plan that's submitted to Westminster City Council, we should be able to figure that out. If there's a small parcel of land, you can almost 100% count on it, but that's probably the master district. And they're going to execute over time those intergovernmental agreements to make the District 1 the boss.
Jim, are the master plans on file with the state of Colorado, DORA, or somebody that someone could actually access those?
Yes, but not until they're approved, not until the service plan, as my understanding is, would be on the state Colorado Department of Local Affairs website. I can get a link to Karen and she can distribute it to all the participants if you're interested in looking at. But since this one hasn't been created yet, there won't be any information there until and if a new metro district is approved.
Okay, the question was actually from the GEOS, so they're trying to figure out how to unbury themselves from this monster that they're living under.
In the GEO, is there a master what I'm calling a master district?
Well, we're not aware of one, but where would be the place we should go to find out?
Let's why don't you and I we'll exchange emails and we'll figure out a way to get that done to see how your particular development has been set up. Are you okay? Do you get to vote on new bond issues or new tax increases in any way?
We have, yeah, that's related to another question that came from my neighbor Reiner. So we have 2 people on the board who are residents, but it's not a majority. So we could vote against the bonds, but we're going to lose because the developer has more seats than us. So my neighbor Reiner asks, could we vote out the developer? The developer is telling us that since he's a developer, we can't vote him out. We can't have a majority. And he also said if we even want to increase the number of residents on the board, we'd have to pay $25,000 rather than $2,000 for an election.
I haven't heard that one before. That's a new one. I don't think that's true. We can look into the particulars of that situation again when we talk. I don't believe that's true. I think my understanding is, and again, each of these are set up individually with their own attributes. My understanding is once a resident comes forward and says, I want to serve on the board, and they're a property owner, meaning they're an elector, the developer affiliated person has to step down and let that person replace them. And frankly, often there's a lot of it's usually verbal, a lot of verbal misinformation that comes from the developer misinforming residents of their rights.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised given our experience with Chad.
Okay.
Okay, so two questions, I'll put them together. What was the original rationale for allowing metro districts? And a second question is there any advantage or disadvantage for a city in allowing the metro districts?
For some reason now, I can't seem to change my slide. Let me tell you, I think here was the original, and if I don't get to the second question, remind me, Karen, make sure I answer that. The original reason I think for this, for the state to allow local governments to approve metro special districts was that, let's take my neighborhood as an example. Let's say that I have this desire that I want to do a bunch of public improvements, and city council where I live doesn't want to do it. So the one alternative that I have available to me is I can develop that service plan, present it to city council, and if city council approves that service plan, it then authorizes an election. So if the people, if we get 50% plus one who agree with, I want better roads, I want better sewers, I want a swimming pool in my part of town, all of that stuff. If we get 51% of the people who agree with me, the one who's proposing the creation of this district, then the metro district gets created. And that was by majority rule because there are residents already living there. Okay? The way this law has been manipulated is that when the developer buys an unimproved lot, there's no residents living there. And they're creating the metro district, the new metro district, with no residents there, and the only people who are voting are affiliated with the developer. So the developer can do a bunch of stuff without any resident input and actually obligate the residents before they even set foot on the property. So this is, I don't think that was an intent when the legislature created the statute. It wasn't their intention that the developer should be making all the fiscal decisions within the metro district forever. I hope that answered her question.
What department of the city, this is from Eric at GEOS, what department of the city would have the MSD service plans on file? Is that the finance department?
It would either be, it depends on the city, it would either be maybe something called something like the Department of Finance or the Planning Department. And those are all public documents that are subject to an open records request.
So we have a follow-up question that says, I'm confused. So without the metro districts, would the city have to pay for infrastructure?
It's a good question. There's two ways that most of the rest of the country handles infrastructure financing for lots that are unimproved, what I call dirt districts. There's just dirt there, okay? One way is that the city can build the infrastructure. That obviously is going to cost the city. They may issue a bond. They may have to increase property taxes on their constituents to build additional infrastructure. That was the traditional way it had been done. The alternative is that the developer could do this on their own. The developer can basically either get a bank loan, get a loan from a bank, use the proceeds of that loan to build the infrastructure, and then bake the cost of that infrastructure into the price of each home, to each home buyer. But that's the other way it could be done. In my view, both of those are much more transparent. There's much more accountability. There's much more understanding of home buyers of what they're getting into than this kind of shell game that is played with the way metro districts are being utilized in Colorado. So someone has to pay for that infrastructure. I think that's the premise of the question, and the premise is correct. Someone has to pay for it. I think it should be either the city that puts the infrastructure, where you can go to city council and say, well, I don't think this was an effective expenditure of money for this particular piece of infrastructure, et cetera, where you can hold someone accountable. Or then you can make the decision as to whether you thought the developer who used a bank loan or their own money to build in the infrastructure, when you buy the home, that's going to be baked into the home price, and there won't be any hidden costs when you're sitting down at the time of closing.
We have a question, which I missed. It was an early question. Has the current city council, which I believe is referring to Westminster, given any hint as to why they would consider an MSD, and what is the pitch? I'm going to take a stab at that. Okay. In Westminster, I believe it's there has not been an MSD approved. I think it's been since 2013. So this current city council has not, we don't know what their approach will be, although they were in a 5-2 vote in favor of the developer, and you know, it's a signal that they're open to this. In 2018, and it was finalized in 2019, Arvada Capital filed a request with the planning department trying to move a pre-approval up by the city for their metropolitan tax district proposal, which is where that 55 mil came from. The planning department, and that was codified with a vote by the Westminster City Council in 2019, rejected that request by Arvada Capital, saying that there would be no consideration of a metropolitan tax district before there was an approval on the development. So in January 2022, the development was approved 5-2. So now the city council will more than likely see an application. We're confident that the Arvada Capital Peak Development will file, if they haven't already done a formal application, will file with the city for a metropolitan tax district. They have said that in forum after forum when residents have asked them about that. We know that as of today, there was not a, or as of yesterday, there wasn't a full application, but there was draft submitted, and we'll follow that very closely and make that public when that comes to be. I would encourage those who live here in Westminster to approach the city council and engage in an educational discussion about the metro districts and your view on it. That is a big purpose for having this forum, to get the facts out, to give people tools and resources to go to be able to try to persuade or explain the downsides, why this should be rejected. Just very quickly, Colorado is a little unique in the metro district business. This is not what is prevalent around the country. Around the country, cities do take on infrastructure build out, and If they don't and developers want to do something, then it's developers who need to invest in their investment. It's not just about a return on their investment, which this has just been cooked into another way to make a lot of money. It's not unusual for cities to build infrastructure, and it was the norm until the early 2000s. So there are several cities up and down the Front Range, along the Front Range, including the city of Longmont, who have actually decided not to allow any further metro districts, and that they would be responsible for their own infrastructure. And reading the document from Westminster, their preamble on why they do not have a favorable attitude towards these districts as a policy that was adopted, I think, in 2004, was because of the nature of how they are misleading from their very conception. It's a real buyer beware. So for those who are still on the line who are in Westminster, I really encourage trying to engage with the staff and the council and to make this as public as possible, to get the word out and educate our community in terms of what these districts are.
Karen, can I reinforce your message on that? I've seen too many city councils and too many county commissioners who this is basically a routine approval, and there's stuff that's been stuffed in that service plan that goes before city council that provides all kinds of opportunities for abuse. And frankly, in my experience, these local government officials do not understand what the developer is about to do. I would encourage people, make sure you turn out, make sure you understand what's in that service plan. It can be a pretty technical document, but to the extent that you can figure it out, stand up and be heard. Otherwise, this will be routinely approved if it is presented.
I'm going to just take two more questions because I think we're going to go to 7:30. So let's see if we can get a couple more questions in. The first one is, does this have to go to the Planning Commission prior to council? In the city of Westminster, no. It goes straight through the city council after it's reviewed by the finance department and the planning department, I believe. If they want to move forward with a motion, they'll bring it directly to the city council. I answered that. Okay. Where is the information regarding any financial commitments of the MSD, for example, details of the financing by the current and past developers? So where would somebody find the financial commitments or loans and bonds? Where would that record be? I think that's what the question is.
Some of that, once the Metro District has been created, some of that information will be housed at the Colorado Department of Local Affairs. It's a little bit of a clunky website, frankly, and it doesn't always have all the. Sometimes you really. I know I was talking to David Magoya, the former reporter for the Denver Post and now a reporter for the Denver Gazette. When he had to do some digging on this, it wasn't an easy task at all. It's a lot of this stuff is very complex and it's also very invisible, and you have to do a lot of digging. It's not going to be that easy, and unfortunately, I think the status quo would like to keep it that way. So if people have questions, they can either funnel them through Karen about their particular situation if they're in a different metro special district, or I'm going to be around when this thing gets proposed, but we'll be trying to look at all the fine print and figure out what's up and what they're planning to do. And I'll be alerting Karen, who can then in turn alert the rest of the community.
Tell us about MSDs and their ability to foreclose on people's homes.
That's a good question. They in the case, I believe in the case that you cited, that was just covered, was that I think it was KVDR that covered that story? Yeah, on television.
Yeah.
That was actually the homeowners association. That was the homeowners association that was foreclosing on folks who were not in the HOA's view was not keeping up with their obligations. But the Metro District also has that capability. Okay, if for example, if you can't keep up with your property taxes and you're not paying them, they can basically, your home is collateral, and they can take the home in lieu of paying those property taxes. They can take the home to get those property taxes paid. They're just like any other local government in that respect. And so they can do that to make sure that they're paid in full. Again, these are relatively, when you have that kind of collateral, these are relatively risky investments because especially in this real estate market with home values being the way they are, so that the developer is not really taking that much risk on someone who can't foreclose on the property, because they can take someone who can't pay their property taxes, they can foreclose on their property and sell it to somebody else and get the payment in full.
We have a question. Are there any caps on what the board or developer can charge?
Another excellent question. There are some caps in the state statute, but there are also some loopholes in the state statute where that cap can be bypassed or circumvented. So that's a really good question. It's a technical one. The cap that will be in effect, and again, that service plan that will be presented to Westminster City Council has to be scrutinized very carefully to actually see what the effective cap is, because there may be what I guess we would call a nominal cap, but that may not in fact be the effective cap, because sometimes that too can be kind of hidden within the service plan. And so that'll have to be scrutinized once the actual service plan is presented to Westminster City Council.
And here in Westminster, the Title 32 has some caps called out, a 25 mil actually on residential and a 50 mil on commercial. And then they have some caveats for maintenance and operations so that you can pay the exorbitant fees to attorneys, accountants. I know that the GEOS folks know all about paying exorbitant fees for interfacing with administrators of the Metro District. But
yeah, we were charged $300 an hour just to have mistakes that they made in collecting our monthly Metro District fee, and they made a mistake on how they booked it, and we were charged $300 an hour for them just to correct it.
I hate to say this, but this is very typical of other developer-controlled Metro special districts.
So for those in Westminster, we have to really scrutinize that Title 32 and see what it seems to me in reading through it, and some other folks who are still on. I think the initial concept, what was initially voted in favor of in this city was very restrictive in terms of the Metro districts, where some other cities have much more, less regulation on the developer districts. The city here, at least at the time that it was approved in the early 2000s, were not favorable to this concept and put some safeguards in to protect the rights of the future residents that would live in these developments. And actually has made the point in their Title 32 document about the pressures on the surrounding communities. So hopefully there can be some serious study on the part of our current city council into their document that they should be using as their guide, the regulations that were adopted by the city.
And Karen, this is a public meeting, so if there happens to be someone who's from the developer here, I hope they'll take all of this very, very seriously and not create the opportunities for abuse in the service plan that they do submit to Westminster City Council. Let's hope we're preventing problems rather than trying to clean them up after they've already been made.
Good point. We don't have any more questions in the chat, and we're just about out of time. Maybe Jim, if you would like to type in a way to contact you and how people could get signed up for your newsletter, which is how we connected, was through the newsletter originally, you know, reading about them in an article and then tracking down the newsletter. I think some people would find that information. I want to thank everyone who came out tonight. It was a really good showing. This is an extremely important issue. It's one, if in the case of Westminster, if the city makes the wrong decision, it will be a 40 or 50-year commitment that residents will be living with incredible debt that they will be paying dearly for and not aware of. The folks from GEOS, as always, I want a big shout out and thank you for sharing your story, and that we'll continue to work together in trying to expose what these developers, which are in common, are doing. And Jim, thank you. This was a wonderful presentation, and the work that you put into putting this together, it was very informative. And I really, really do encourage folks to stay in touch. We do have the presentation recorded, which we will offer to anyone who would like to show it to their group. We will let our city council here in Westminster know that it's available for their viewing, which I hope that they accept that invitation and engage. We had some really good discussion tonight, and with that, I want to say good night and thank you, and we will keep everyone informed as soon as we get the official documents and a chance to really review what's in them and get that information out to everyone. And thank you everyone for putting up with our technical shortcomings.
Yeah, again, please excuse my on-the-job training. Everyone have a good night now. Thanks so much for being interested in participating.
Thank you.